If you'd asked me 5 years ago, I would have told you my life was pretty perfect. Alex and I had built a beautiful life together, or so I thought. He was charming, ambitious, and seemed like the kind of husband women envied. We had Liam, our sweet boy who could light up a room with his laughter. I remember thinking, how did I get so lucky? It was one of those evenings where everything felt just right. Liam was playing with his toy cars on the living room rug, and Alex came home with a bottle of champagne and a grin that stretched ear to ear. I have a surprise for you, he said, holding out a folder. I blinked at him, curious. What's this? Papers, he said casually, leaning in for a kiss. I've decided to gift you the company. I want it to be ours, together. A symbol of how much I trust you. I stared at him, speechless. The company was his pride and joy, something he'd worked hard to build. And now, he was giving it to me? Alex, I don't even know what to say. Say you'll sign it, he laughed. It's all legal, just putting it in your name. Makes sense for tax purposes. Plus, I want you to feel like an equal partner. I was so touched by his words, so blinded by what I thought was love, that I didn't think twice. I signed those papers without reading a single line. I mean, why would I? This was my husband, the man I trusted more than anyone else in the world. A few weeks later, everything started crumbling. It began with whispers, employees quitting unexpectedly, vendors pulling out of contracts, and strange calls that Alex avoided answering. I brushed it off at first, thinking maybe it was just a rough patch, but then one morning, I opened the mail and saw the foreclosure notice for the company building. What's going on, Alex? I asked him, holding up the letter. He barely glanced at it, shrugging. Don't worry about it, I've got it under control. But he didn't. Within days, the truth came crashing down. The company wasn't just struggling, it was drowning. And worse, it wasn't his company anymore. It was mine. Every debt, every liability, every dollar owed was in my name. And Alex, he drained the accounts dry. I couldn't believe it. I tried to confront him, but he was always one step ahead, dodging my questions with excuses and charm. Then one night, he just vanished. I came home to find the house eerily quiet. Liam's toys were gone from the living room, his favorite stuffed bear missing from the couch. Panic bubbled in my chest as I ran upstairs to his room, empty. His clothes, his books, even his bedspread. Everything was gone. Alex, I screamed, my voice echoing through the empty house. Alex, where are you? I found a note on the kitchen counter. Just a few words scribbled on a piece of paper. Emma, it's better this way. Take care of yourself. That was it. No explanation, no apology. He had taken Liam and disappeared without a trace. Before I could even process what was happening, the investigators showed up at my door. Men in suits, armed with documents and accusations I could barely comprehend. They told me I was being charged with fraud, that the company I owned had been running illegal financial schemes. I tried to explain, to tell them it wasn't me, that Alex had set me up, but they didn't care. The evidence pointed to me, and Alex had vanished. I was the one left holding the bag. Prison was, well, it was exactly as terrible as you'd imagine. The cell was cold, the food was barely edible, and every day felt like a year. But none of that compared to the pain of losing Liam. I didn't know where he was, who was taking care of him, or what lies Alex was feeding him about me. At night, I'd lie awake in that tiny cell, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, replaying everything in my mind. How could I have been so blind? How did I not see what Alex was doing? The man I loved, the man I built a life with, had betrayed me in the worst way imaginable. For a long time, the anger kept me going. I hated Alex with every fiber of my being. I hated how he'd used my love against me, how he'd stolen not just my freedom, but my son. But eventually, even the anger faded, leaving behind something far more painful: determination. I promised myself that I would find Liam. No matter how long it took, no matter what I had to do, I would get my son back. And Alex? He would pay for what he'd done. I spent years wasting away in that prison. When I walked out of those prison gates, it wasn't freedom that greeted me. It was fear. Fear of what lay ahead, of how I would rebuild my life when everything I once had was gone. I had nothing but the clothes on my back, a small envelope with the pitiful savings I earned from prison work, and the weight of the years I'd lost. The world outside felt foreign, the noise of traffic, the bustle of strangers. It was all overwhelming. For so long, my life had been confined to the monotony of steel bars and concrete walls, but there was no time to dwell on the past. I needed to figure out my next steps. I tried applying for jobs, but every application ended the same way. Once employers saw my record, the door slammed shut. "We'll be in touch" became a familiar refrain, but the calls never came. It didn't matter that I had no real choice in what happened. The world only saw me as a fraud. I spent nights in cheap motels and days scouring job boards, taking whatever work I could find. Dishwashing, cleaning, waiting tables. It was exhausting and degrading, but I didn't care. Every dollar I earned brought me one step closer to what really mattered: finding Liam. The first thing I did after getting out was buy a cheap burner phone. I went to an old shoebox I'd hidden years ago in a storage locker, one of the few things Alex hadn't taken from me. Inside were photos of Liam as a toddler, smiling at the beach, blowing out birthday candles, cuddled in my arms. Those pictures were my lifeline, the only tangible connection I had left to my son. Using those photos, I began my search. I visited the schools he might have attended, parks we used to frequent, and even hospitals, hoping to find some trace of him. But every lead turned into a dead end. It was as if Alex had erased every piece of their old lives and started over. When I ran out of places to look, I turned to private investigators. They weren't cheap, and I could only afford their services for short bursts, but they gave me hope. One by one, they pieced together fragments of Alex's new life. I learned that he'd changed both his and Liam's last names. They were living somewhere far away, and Alex had created a completely new identity for himself, cutting off any trail that could lead back to me. It broke me to think about Liam growing up without knowing the truth. He'd been a sweet, curious boy who adored bedtime stories and Saturday mornings at the park. Now he was a teenager, likely believing the lies Alex had fed him, that I abandoned him, that I didn't love him enough to stay. The thought of my son hating me twisted the knife even deeper. One night, while I was waitressing at a dingy diner, I spotted someone familiar sitting at the counter. It was Mark, one of Alex's former colleagues at the company we'd built together. My first instinct was to avoid him. What if he recognized me and called the police? But I couldn't pass up the chance to learn something, anything, that could bring me closer to Liam. I approached cautiously, keeping my head low as I poured his coffee. When he looked up, recognition flickered across his face. "Emma?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. I nodded. "It's me." Mark didn't ask too many questions about my past, thankfully, but he seemed genuinely sympathetic. Over the course of a few conversations, I learned that Mark had left the company shortly after Alex's betrayal, disgusted by what had happened. He'd heard rumors about Alex's new life and even knew the state where Alex had relocated. "You didn't hear it from me," Mark said, sliding a napkin across the counter with a scribbled address. "But if you're looking for him, this might help." Tears welled up in my eyes as I clutched the napkin. "Thank you," I whispered. That address gave me a new sense of purpose. I began piecing together everything I could about Alex's life. Through careful digging, I discovered that Alex had remarried and was living in a wealthy suburb. Liam was enrolled in a prestigious private school and seemed to be thriving, at least on the surface. But then came the hardest blow of all. I learned that Alex had told Liam I'd abandoned them. To my son, I was a monster who had walked away from him without a second thought. The revelation crushed me. I spent hours staring at Liam's pictures, wondering how Alex could so easily erase the bond I'd shared with my son. But after the initial wave of heartbreak, a fire lit within me. I refused to let Alex's lies be the final chapter of my story. I made a plan. I couldn't just show up at Liam's doorstep and demand to see him. Not yet. I needed to be careful, calculated. Alex had stolen years of my life, but I wasn't going to let him win. Not this time. Step one was saving money. I took on extra shifts at the diner, cut every corner I could, and kept every dollar I earned in a separate account. Step two was rebuilding myself. I refused to be the broken woman Alex left behind. I started reading books on law and business in my spare time, arming myself with the knowledge I'd need to take him down. And step three find Liam, not just physically, but emotionally. I knew I couldn't undo the lies Alex had told overnight, but I could plant seeds of doubt. I could show Liam the truth, piece by piece, until he saw the mother who loved him more than anything in the world. As I lay awake in my tiny apartment that night, clutching Mark's napkin in one hand and Liam's photo in the other, I made myself a promise. I would get my son back, no matter how long it took, no matter what it cost. I would find a way. Moving to the same city as Alex and Liam felt like stepping into enemy territory. Every street corner, every park, every cafe held the possibility of running into Alex. But I wasn't here for him. I was here for Liam. I started by renting a small apartment on the edge of town, far from the wealthy neighborhoods Alex now called home. Under a new alias, Emily Carter, I took a job at a charming little cafe near Liam's private school. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me access to the world Liam inhabited. His classmates came in after school for snacks and study sessions, chattering about their days. Every now and then, I'd hear Liam's name, usually accompanied by a story about how good he was at soccer or how funny he was in class. I spent weeks learning his routines. I knew what time his soccer practices ended, which library he liked to visit, and even the park where he walked the family dog. It wasn't stalking, it was preparation. If I wanted to reconnect with my son, I couldn't just barge into his life. I needed him to feel comfortable with me, to trust me. Finally, the opportunity came during a community event at the park, a fundraiser for the local youth soccer league. Liam's team was playing. I volunteered at the bake sale booth, casually keeping an eye on the field. When the game ended, I spotted him walking toward the refreshment tables, sweaty and smiling. My heart ached with the urge to run to him, to hold him, to tell him I was his mother. But I swallowed the impulse and waited for the right moment. "Great game out there," I said, handing him a bottle of water as he passed by. Liam looked up, startled, but polite. "Thanks. You've got some serious skills," I added, keeping my tone light and friendly. "Are you aiming for the big leagues someday?" He grinned, the same grin I remembered from when he was a toddler. "Maybe. My dad says I should focus on school, though." "Smart advice," I said, though my stomach churned at the mention of Alex. "But it never hurts to dream big." Over the next few weeks, I found small, natural ways to cross paths with Liam. Sometimes at the cafe, sometimes at the park. I never pushed, just casual conversations, little moments where I could learn more about him. I discovered that he loved science and had a knack for fixing things. He wanted to build robots one day, maybe even work for NASA. He told me about his favorite movies, his soccer team, and his dog, Max. But beneath his cheerful demeanor, I noticed cracks. One day, as we sat on a park bench watching his dog, Max, chase a frisbee, Liam let something slip. "Dad's always busy. He says it's work, but I think he just doesn't want to be home." I kept my voice steady, though my heart broke for him. "That must be hard. Do you talk to him about it?" He shrugged, looking away. "Not really. He just says I should be grateful for what we have." I wanted to tell him that he deserved better, that he deserved a father who didn't put his own ambitions above his son's happiness. But I knew I couldn't say that, at least not yet. Instead, I listened. I let him talk about the things that made him happy and the things that frustrated him. Slowly, I planted seeds of doubt about Alex, not through direct accusations, but by gently questioning some of the things Liam took for granted. "Do you ever wonder why your dad spends so much time working?" I asked once, during a conversation about his father's absences. "Yeah, but he says it's for me," Liam replied, though his tone was uncertain. "Well," I said carefully, "sometimes people say things to make themselves feel better. It doesn't mean they're always right." Liam nodded, filing the thought away. As Liam and I grew closer, the weight of my secret became harder to bear. Every time he smiled at me, every time he opened up about his life, I felt a pang of guilt. How could I lie to him when all I wanted was to protect him? But how could I tell him the truth without shattering everything he thought he knew? There were moments when I almost slipped. Like the day he showed me a picture of his mom, Alex's new wife, and asked if I thought she was pretty. "She's beautiful," I said, forcing a smile, but all I could think was, "She's not your mother." "I am." Or the time he asked me why I didn't have kids of my own. "I think you'd be a great mom," he said with a grin. My throat tightened. Thank you, Liam, I managed. That means a lot. At night, I would sit in my tiny apartment, staring at the photos of Liam from before Alex took him. I wanted so badly to tell him everything, to show him who I really was. But I knew the timing wasn't right. If I pushed too hard, too fast, I could lose him forever. So I waited. I let the bond grow naturally, trusting that when the time came, Liam would see the truth. And in the meantime, I kept gathering pieces of the puzzle, little hints about Alex's life, his finances, and his lies. Every detail brought me closer to the day when I could finally expose him for what he really was. Once I knew Liam trusted me, I shifted my focus to the man who destroyed our lives, Alex. It wasn't enough to reconnect with Liam. I needed to expose Alex for everything he had done. For me, for Liam, for the years I lost because of him. Working at the cafe gave me the perfect cover. It was the kind of place where everyone spilled gossip, whether they meant to or not. Overheard conversations and passing remarks gave me little nuggets of information about Alex's business dealings. He was no longer the big shot he used to be, but he'd managed to keep up appearances with flashy cars and expensive dinners. The problem with a life built on lies, though, is that it always leaves cracks, and I was determined to find them. One day, while serving coffee, I overheard two men discussing a failed deal involving Alex. Words like shady and offshore accounts made my ears perk up. It was enough to confirm what I already suspected. Alex hadn't changed. If anything, he doubled down on the deceit that put me behind bars. To dig deeper, I reached out to one of Alex's former colleagues, a man named Peter. We'd worked together years ago, back when Alex and I were running the company as a team. Peter had always been kind to me, and when I explained my situation, he didn't hesitate to help. I always knew Alex was up to something, Peter said during our first meeting at a quiet diner. He used to brag about how good he was at covering his tracks, but every trail leaves something behind. Peter agreed to help me uncover the evidence I needed, warning me that it wouldn't be easy. If Alex really has offshore accounts, he'll have gone to great lengths to bury them. That's why I need you, I told him. I can't let him keep getting away with this. Peter and I started digging. Late nights were spent poring over old records, piecing together transactions that didn't add up. The deeper we went, the more disgusted I became. Alex hadn't just drained the company we built together. He'd used forged signatures, including mine, to authorize illegal transfers. Money I'd worked hard to contribute was now sitting in secret bank accounts in the Cayman Islands. It was infuriating to see how far he'd gone to erase me while profiting from everything we built. But it also fueled my determination. Every document I uncovered, every email Peter tracked down, became another brick in the case I was building against Alex. One evening, Peter called me with a breakthrough. I found a series of shell companies tied to Alex's accounts. He's been funneling money through them for years, probably to evade taxes and hide his real income. My stomach churned. And the funds, are any of them connected to what he took from me? Peter hesitated. Yes, it looks like some of the initial money came from the accounts you had access to during your marriage. I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. It wasn't just fraud, it was personal. He'd used me as a scapegoat and stolen everything I had in the process. But instead of breaking down, I channeled my anger into action. I started organizing the evidence meticulously. I created folders with emails, financial records, and transaction logs, ensuring everything was clear and undeniable. Every time I added another piece to the puzzle, I felt closer to justice. While I worked to expose Alex, I was careful to shield Liam from the truth, for now. He was still a teenager, still trying to figure out his place in the world. I didn't want to overwhelm him with my plans or taint his view of his father until I had everything ready. Instead, I focused on spending time with him, continuing to build our bond. We'd meet at the park or grab hot chocolate after his soccer games. Sometimes we'd just sit and talk about his dreams, NASA, robotics, and all the things he wanted to achieve. I saw so much of myself in him, his quiet determination and curiosity about the world. It made me even more determined to protect him from Alex's lies. I also tried to teach Liam subtle lessons about honesty and integrity. When he told me about a classmate who cheated on a test and didn't get caught, I asked him how he felt about it. "It's not fair," he said, frowning. "Everyone else studied hard, and he just got away with it." Sometimes people do get away with things, I said carefully. But that doesn't mean it's right. And it doesn't mean they won't face consequences later. Liam nodded, absorbing my words. I guess I'd rather do things the right way, even if it's harder. My heart swelled with pride. He didn't know it, but he was already so much stronger than Alex ever was. As much as I wanted to protect Liam, keeping the secret of who I really was weighed heavily on me. There were moments when I almost blurted it out, like when he mentioned missing his mom, though he didn't remember much about her, or when he asked why I didn't have a family of my own. I had a family once, I said quietly during one of those moments, but things didn't work out the way I hoped. He looked at me with a mix of curiosity and sympathy. Do you miss them? Every day, I admitted. I could tell he wanted to ask more, but he didn't push, and for that I was grateful. The time to reveal everything would come, but I needed to be patient. I needed to make sure that when the truth came out, it would be undeniable, not just to Liam, but to everyone. As I continued gathering evidence and building my case, I reminded myself of why I was doing this. It wasn't just about taking Alex down, it was about reclaiming my life, my reputation, and most importantly, my relationship with my son. This wasn't just a fight for justice, it was a fight for my family, and I wasn't going to lose. I knew I couldn't tell Liam the truth outright. He trusted Alex, or at least he wanted to, and I didn't want to shatter that trust too abruptly. Instead, I started weaving small truths into our conversations, presenting them as harmless anecdotes or hypothetical scenarios. One afternoon, while we sat on a bench watching kids play soccer, I shared a carefully crafted story. I began. I had a friend once. She was married to this guy who seemed perfect on the outside. Smart, charming, successful. But one day she found out he'd been hiding things from her. Big things. Liam looked up from tying his shoelace, curious. What happened? I sighed, as if reliving the memory. He framed her for something she didn't do, financial stuff. She lost everything, her home, her reputation, even her relationship with her kids. That's awful, Liam said, his face serious. Why would someone do that? Greed, I said simply, and fear. He wanted to cover his tracks, so he made her the scapegoat. Liam was quiet for a moment, then said, Did she ever get her life back? She did, I said, smiling gently. But it took time. She had to be smart and patient, and she had to trust her instincts. I could see the wheels turning in his head. I didn't push further, but I knew the story had planted a seed. As the weeks went on, I noticed subtle changes in Liam. He started asking more questions about his father's business trips, about the people Alex surrounded himself with, and even about his mother, me. Dad always says Mom left us because she didn't want to be a mom anymore, he said one day as we walked Max, the family dog. But, I don't know, it doesn't really make sense. Why not? I asked carefully. Well, he never talks about her, and when I ask questions, he just changes the subject. It's weird, right? I nodded, keeping my tone neutral. Sometimes people avoid topics that make them uncomfortable, but you're right to trust your instincts. If something doesn't feel right, it's worth looking into. Liam's brow furrowed as he processed my words. I just wish I knew more about her. My heart ached, but I knew I couldn't reveal myself yet. Instead, I encouraged him to keep asking questions. Maybe you should talk to him about it again, or ask other people who might have known her. Liam nodded slowly, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. I could see the cracks forming in Alex's carefully constructed narrative. As Liam's suspicion grew, so did Alex's paranoia. He must have sensed something shifting because his behavior became more erratic. Liam mentioned that his father had started checking his phone and questioning where he spent his time. Dad's been acting so weird lately, Liam confided one evening. He even asked if I'd been talking to anyone new. Like, what's that about? I shrugged, feigning ignorance. Maybe he's stressed about work? Maybe, Liam said, but he didn't sound convinced. But he's been snapping at me for no reason, and he's always gone. It's like he doesn't want to be home anymore. Inside, I felt a grim satisfaction. Alex's paranoia was working against him, driving a wedge between him and Liam without me having to lift a finger. Still, I needed to tread carefully. The last thing I wanted was for Alex to figure out I was the one sowing these doubts. One evening, I caught a glimpse of Alex at a community event. He looked different. The confident, polished man I once knew was gone, replaced by someone who seemed constantly on edge. His eyes darted around the room, and he flinched every time his phone buzzed. It was clear he suspected someone was digging into his past, but he didn't know it was me. The breakthrough came during one of my conversations with Liam. He mentioned that Alex had been unusually secretive about a recent trip. Dad said he was going to a conference, but then I overheard him on the phone talking about some offshore account. Liam said, frowning. Do you think that's normal? I kept my expression neutral, though my heart raced. Offshore accounts can be legal, I said carefully, but they're also used to hide money sometimes. Did he say anything else? Not really, Liam said, looking thoughtful, but he sounded nervous, and he's been on edge ever since. I decided to push a little further. Do you ever feel like your dad isn't completely honest with you? Liam hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, sometimes. But he's my dad, you know? I want to trust him. And you should, I said gently. But trust doesn't mean ignoring your instincts. If something feels off, it's okay to ask questions. Liam didn't respond right away, but I could see the conflict in his eyes. He wanted to believe in Alex, but the cracks in the facade were becoming too big to ignore. I knew I was getting closer to the moment when I'd have to reveal the truth, but I also knew Liam needed to come to his own conclusions first. If I pushed too hard, he might shut down or side with Alex out of loyalty. So I continued to play the long game, dropping small hints and encouraging Liam to think critically about what he saw and heard. I also kept gathering evidence, ensuring that when the time came, I'd have everything I needed to prove my story. Every step brought me closer to my goal, and every conversation with Liam reminded me of why I was doing this. Not for revenge, but for him, to give him the truth, to give him a chance at a life free from Alex's lies. The pieces were falling into place. All I needed now was the right moment to bring it all together. It was time. After months of careful planning and earning Liam's trust, I knew I couldn't keep the truth from him any longer. The documents I had painstakingly collected were organized in a neat folder on the coffee table. My hands trembled as I waited for Liam to arrive. This was the moment I'd been working toward. But the weight of it felt unbearable. What if he didn't believe me? What if I lost him before I ever truly had him back? Liam walked in, his usual cheerful demeanor tempered by curiosity. What's going on? He asked, glancing at the folder. I took a deep breath. There's something I need to tell you, Liam. Something about me and your dad. His brow furrowed, and he sat down cautiously. What do you mean? I opened the folder, pulling out the first document. Do you remember the stories your dad told you about your mom, about how she left you? Yeah, he said slowly. He said she didn't want to be a mom anymore? My heart clenched, but I kept my voice steady. That wasn't true. I'm your mom, Liam. He froze, his face a mix of disbelief and confusion. What? No, that's not possible. My mom, she's gone. I took out the old family pictures I had with me, showing him the ones where I hugged him so closely. He just stared at the pictures in disbelief, not uttering a single word. I slid the other documents toward him. Your dad lied to you, Liam. He took you away from me, and he made me the villain in his story. But the truth is, he framed me for crimes I didn't commit, stole everything from me, and left me to take the fall. Liam's hands hovered over the papers, his breathing shallow. This doesn't make sense. Why would he do that? Because he was scared of being caught for the things he did. He used me to cover up his crimes. I went to prison, Liam, for years. And every single day, I thought about you. Liam read through the documents in silence, his face growing paler with each page. The evidence was irrefutable. Forged signatures, fake accounts, the trail of money leading to Alex's hidden funds. By the time he reached the end, his hands were shaking. I don't understand, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Why would he do this to you? To us? Because he wanted to protect himself, I said gently. And he thought he could get away with it. He didn't care who got hurt in the process, not even you. Liam's eyes filled with tears. All this time, I thought you abandoned me. I thought you didn't want me. I reached across the table, taking his hands in mine. Liam, I have always wanted you. You were the only thing that kept me going. And when I got out of prison, I made it my mission to find you and make things right. He looked at me, the pain in his eyes cutting through me like a knife. What do I do now? That evening, Liam went home armed with the truth. I didn't want to let him go alone, but I knew he needed to confront Alex on his own terms. He promised to call me if he needed anything, but the determination in his eyes told me he was ready. When Liam walked through the door, Alex greeted him with his usual charm. Hey kiddo, how was your day? Don't, Liam snapped, cutting him off. He dropped the folder onto the kitchen counter. I know everything, Dad. Alex froze, his confident smile faltering. What are you talking about? You lied to me. About Mom. About everything. Liam's voice cracked, but he kept going. You framed her, stole her money, and ruined her life. And you made me think she didn't want me. How could you do that? Alex's face turned pale. Liam, listen. No, don't try to talk your way out of this, Liam shouted. I saw the documents. I saw what you did. How could you lie to me? How could you do this to her? Alex tried to step closer, but Liam backed away. It's not what you think, Alex said desperately. I was trying to protect us, your mom. She wasn't who you think she was. Stop lying, Liam yelled. I know who she is. I've been talking to her, and she's nothing like the person you told me about. She's kind and honest, and she loves me. You're the liar. Cornered and out of excuses, Alex finally broke down. I didn't have a choice, he said, his voice trembling. I was drowning in debt, and the company was failing. I needed a way out. So you destroyed her life? Liam's voice was filled with disgust. You could have owned up to your mistakes, but instead you framed her and stole everything from her. And then you made me believe it was her fault. Alex dropped his head into his hands. I thought I could fix things. I thought I could make it right eventually. Well, you didn't, Liam said coldly. You just made everything worse. Word of Alex's crime spread quickly after Liam confronted him. With the evidence I had gathered, authorities began investigating his business dealings. The fraudulent accounts, the stolen funds, and the forged signatures painted a damning picture. Within weeks, Alex was arrested and faced charges for fraud and embezzlement. His name, once respected in the business world, became synonymous with scandal. The life he had built on lies crumbled around him. For Liam, the realization that his father wasn't the man he thought he was devastating, but it also brought him closer to me. Together, we began the process of rebuilding our relationship, piece by piece. The revelation of Alex's betrayal was painful, but it was also liberating. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. The truth was out, and Liam knew who I was. We had a long road ahead, but I was ready to walk it, together. I used Peter's legal help and was able to take over what was left of Alex's company. Taking over the company wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming what was stolen from me and turning it into something honest, something worthwhile. The mountain of evidence I had collected left the board of directors no choice but to vote Alex out. His arrest sealed the deal, and I was reinstated as the rightful owner and CEO. Walking into the boardroom for the first time in years was surreal. I could feel the weight of every betrayal, every sleepless night, and every whispered lie pressing down on me. But as I looked around the room at the faces of former colleagues, some guilty, some relieved, I felt a surge of strength. This was my moment. I won't pretend this will be easy, I said, addressing the board. The company's reputation has been damaged, and it's going to take time to rebuild. But I promise you we'll do it the right way. No more lies, no more shortcuts. A few colleagues who had known me before Alex's betrayal came up to me after the meeting, their faces filled with quiet admiration. We're behind you, Emma, one of them said. We always knew something didn't add up. It's good to have you back. The support from those who believed in me was humbling. It reminded me that even when the world feels like it's against you, there are always people willing to stand by your side. My first order of business was cleaning up the mess Alex left behind. The fraudulent accounts, the debt, the strained relationships with clients, it all had to be addressed. I brought in a new team of advisors, people I trusted, and together we laid out a plan to rebuild the company from the ground up. It wasn't easy. There were days when I felt overwhelmed, when the enormity of the task ahead threatened to crush me. But every time doubt crept in, I reminded myself why I was doing this. Not just for me, but for Liam, for the future we were building together. Slowly but surely, the company began to regain its footing. Clients who had left during Alex's tenure returned, impressed by the transparency and integrity I brought to the table. Media outlets started picking up on the turnaround story, framing it as a tale of redemption and resilience. Clearing my name wasn't just about proving my innocence, it was about reclaiming my identity. For years, I had been Emma, the fraud, Emma, the convict. Now, I had the chance to tell my story on my terms. A major news outlet approached me for an exclusive interview. Sitting in front of the camera, I felt a mix of nerves and determination. The reporter started with the obvious question: Emma, after everything you've been through, how does it feel to be here today? It feels like I've been given a second chance, I said, my voice steady. But it's not just about getting my life back. It's about showing others that even when you're knocked down, you can get back up. You can fight for the truth, for justice, and for yourself. The interview went viral. People were drawn to the story of a woman who had been betrayed but refused to give up. The public support was overwhelming, and for the first time in years, I felt seen, not as a victim, but as a survivor. Of all the victories, this one mattered most. Winning back Liam's trust wasn't something that could be accomplished with a single conversation or grand gesture. It was a process, one built on patience, honesty, and love. At first, Liam was hesitant. He was still processing the truth about Alex and grappling with the lies he had been told his entire life. But little by little, he began to open up. We spent hours talking about his childhood, about the life he had imagined for me, about the years we lost. One evening, as we sat in the kitchen sharing a pizza, he said something that nearly brought me to tears. "I always wondered what it would have been like if you were around, Mom. Now I know, and I think I like it." Hearing him call me Mom was the validation I didn't know I needed. It was proof that the bond we shared was still there, buried under years of lies, but strong enough to survive. With Alex out of the picture, Liam had the chance to start fresh. I enrolled him in a local school, where he quickly made friends and began to thrive. Watching him laugh and smile again was like watching a flower bloom after years in the dark. I made it a point to be present for him in every way I could, helping with homework, cheering him on at soccer games, even just sitting on the couch watching movies together. These moments, small as they were, felt monumental. Liam still had questions about Alex, and I answered them as honestly as I could. I didn't sugarcoat the truth, but I also didn't want to poison him with bitterness. "Your dad made mistakes," I told him, "big ones. But that doesn't mean you have to carry the weight of them. You get to decide who you want to be." Standing in the boardroom one morning, overlooking the city skyline, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Not for what happened, because no one should have to endure that kind of betrayal, but for the strength I found within myself to rise above it. My company was thriving, my name was cleared, and most importantly, my son was back in my life. I had lost so much, but I had also gained something priceless: the knowledge that I could survive anything, that I was capable of building a life worth living, not just for me, but for Liam. Looking out at the city, I smiled. This was my victory, not just over Alex, but over every obstacle that tried to break me. And for the first time in years, I felt truly free.